London's cycle lanes could now be ripped up across, the lockdown cycle lanes could now be ripped up across the UK after the High Court ruled Sadiq Khan's Streetspace scheme was unlawful. Controversial scheme which saw roads closed and others narrowed to create new cycle lanes in the height of lockdown last year was found to be seriously flawed by a High Court judge. The ruling means that similar schemes implemented by councils up and down the country could now be scrapped, but Transport for London bosses insist they will keep the makeshift cycle lanes while they appeal the damning judgment. And of course it was the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association we'll be speaking with shortly, which took legal action over the Streetspace plan announced by Sadiq Khan in May. First, Donnachadh McCarthy, of course, co-founder of Stop Killing Cyclists, is with us. No other way to sugar the pill on this one, but a huge blow for cyclists, Donnachadh. Would that be fair?
It's a huge blow for the vast majority of people who use the City of London streets around Liverpool Street. 450,000 people walk and cycle in that area every day. A tiny number use the cabs. And the cabs are insisting that they can impose on the rest of people, including disabled people who are trying to maintain social distancing, that they have the right to take that space away from them. I think it's a terrible decision by the judge.
Well, it was their space to start with, wasn't it? It was just very recently made your space, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, the idea that the roads of central London belong to a tiny elite cab industry and not to the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who walk and work and cycle and use the buses is outrageous, a claim by this judge. And I'm presuming TfL will appeal it to the Circuit Court to make sure this whimsical decision by this judge is thrown out.
Well, when you say whimsical, I mean, it's not just cab drivers. I mean, cab drivers, of course, need access to work, and this impeded their work, but other drivers too might be grateful. Most people, if they're not on foot, they're in a car. A few people are on bikes, so it's a tiny minority. Maybe that was acknowledged, perhaps explicitly or implicitly or otherwise, by the judge, that this is a minority thing, this cycling stuff.
Well, look, actually, the 50%, if you take Bank Junction in the City of London, 450 pedestrians a day use it, 95% walk, and 50% of the people going through the junction on traffic are actually cycling. It's a tiny minority are actually using cars in central London. 3% of people use cars.
You say more people are using bikes than cars, or 50% bikes, 50% cars? That's not true.
In for example, Bank Junction, 50% of the traffic going through Bank Junction was bikes before this was changed. And what we're talking about here is there's an emergency with CV19. If you look at Liverpool Station, hundreds of thousands of people trying to get through it safely, people in wheelchairs, people walking, the blind, and people cycling. And this tiny group of people argue that 50% of the road space should be for their usage. And when you say we're impinging on black cabs, we're not. That junction in Bishopsgate, the cabs can enter it. The only restrictions, they can't drive through it. They can drive around. It's not a
bit of a problem if you're a taxi, isn't it? If you can't drive where you need to go, which means that you mentioned disabled people and the like, who rely in some cases on the disability access that a black cab in this example gives them.
The black cab can go to every single place in that area. It just has to have a different route sometimes. What you were talking about, 100 to 200 meters, but the impact on the thousands of disabled on the side of the road is dreadful, and they're trying to.
Why is there an impact to the disabled people? Well, what were disabled people doing before these lanes miraculously appeared from last May onwards?
The Streetscape proposal by the mayor is to try and create space for people on sidewalks and cycling, so that when people are trying to get to work without using public transport, that they don't resort to using cars. Because if they resort to using cars, London will seize up and people will be forced together on the sidewalks and spread CV19 that way. OK,
stay where you are, Donnachadh. Let me put some of that to Steve McNamara. Steve, of course, is the General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. And Steve, I don't know if you heard all of Donnachadh's comments, but essentially, just to encapsulate it, I think this fairly represents what he said. What gives a small group of cab drivers the right to change everything for the majority, he said, cyclists and pedestrians? Afternoon, Steve.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian, and good afternoon to you, Donnachadh. The irony is that the court case was won. One of the key issues of the court case and the judgment was on the disability access. the reality is that with this scheme, the nearest we could get people to where they wanted to go was about 150 metres, which 150 metres for you and I, Ian, is absolutely no problem at all. I can just jog along or walk along. Unfortunately, if you're in a wheelchair or you've got heavy shopping or heavy luggage or you're less ambulant, it's an absolute nightmare. And as part of the defence in the case, TfL said to the judge, well, it's not really a problem because if you come in the other way, it's only a 50-metre walk. And the judge very quickly pointed out to TfL's barristers that to get round to the other side means either another 30 minutes detour and possibly doubling the fare and the time. And what the judge said, and one of the clauses that we won on, was the equality assessment. And what she said, not me, what the High Court judge said in the most damning judgment that anyone has ever seen, any of the lawyers have ever seen, she said that TfL did their equality assessment, recognised that it would be a problem for disabled and less ambulant people, and then did absolutely nothing about it and installed the scheme anyway. It doesn't get any worse than that. So the points that were being made just now are just totally wrong.
Okay, Donnachadh, just respond to that. Are you inventing things here that didn't happen?
No, well, actually, what we're actually talking about is this ruling. If the cab industry can actually say that they've got the right to go everywhere, that means that any mayoral actions in central London become a farce, because 60% of cars are cabs and minicabs. If we can't regulate the cabs in central London, we have no hope of tackling the huge scourge for.
Why would you want to be regulating where a cab can go? It's a form of public transport.
It's not a form of public transport.
Of course it's a form of public transport.
Okay, have you looked at the dictionary? The dictionary, the definition of public transport is buses and trains and other transport that are available to the public, charge set fares and run on fixed routes. When you hire a cab, it's not a set fare and it's not a fixed route. It's private transport for hire for rich people who can afford it.
Come on, Donnachadh, that's clearly semantics, isn't it? It's public transportation.
No, it's a private chauffeur for hire by rich people that's taking space from
rich
buses.
People.
Taking space from buses,
rich people, Donnachadh. What do you mean rich people? So if I get a cab right now, I want to go into Covent Garden from London Bridge. Well, why does that make somebody a rich person?
Well, the idea that you can afford £12 to £15 for it to go a couple hundred metres shows
so you're now denying the notion and the concept of taxis.
No, I'm actually arguing that the people who use a taxi to go the couple hundred metres you just argued are the wealthy in central London.
It's not a couple of hundred metres, is it?
They're taking away the space from the buses and the pedestrians and the cyclists who need that space. It's a privileged elitist industry that's taking space and causing massive problems now for people trying to protect themselves from CV19.
You blow me away there, Donnachadh, but I'm going to put that to Steve. That's Steve, who's the General Secretary of the elitist industry. What do you make of that, Steve?
Well, I like the thought of being elite. It'll be the only time in my life I've ever been elite here. But let me just correct him yet again. Now, obviously, Donnachadh knows more than a High Court judge, but the ruling said that we are public transport and we do have a unique status. Now, obviously, Donnachadh disagrees with that, and perhaps he has to pop down to the High Court and put the learned judges right. But that was the ruling. And of course, we do have a special status, and the special status that we have is given to us by virtue of the fact that the mayor sets our fares, the mayor tells us what vehicles we have to drive, and incidentally now, 25% of taxis in London, these new electric ones, we've invested £250 million in them. We have to drive a vehicle that is disability, the wheelchair and all the bits that we have to do. And that gives us the right, if you like, what the High Court judge said, to access anywhere that the buses go, because we are one of only two vehicles in London that are entitled to apply for hire. It's us and the buses, nobody else. And I would just correct Donnachadh again. He talks about 60% of vehicles being taxis and private hire vehicles. That doesn't apply. We're not talking about private hire vehicles here. They are ordinary cars. What we're talking about is taxis. And no way do we make up 60% of the traffic. It's clearly bananas. So what he's doing here, he's picking little sound bites to make it all to suit his arguments. And, of course, his arguments were totally destroyed in the High Court. We were given a unique status. It was recognised, but we were recognised because of the commitment we make to the disability industry. No other form of transport in London is 100% wheelchair accessible. We are.
Steve, let me just, Donnachadh, just a final point then. This is going to appeal. You've already said you thought the judge got this horribly wrong. Do you think the next judge will get it horribly wrong?
Well, I'm hoping the Court of Appeals will throw this out. The judge, the only piece of law that she used was the definition of public transport, and secondly, the rationality. I'm hoping that the appeal court will actually understand what a rational decision by the mayor is to protect people from CV19 across London. That is what rationality is, and I'm hoping the appeals courts will support that.
Do you never use a cab, Donnachadh? I mean, have you got one of those little fold-up bikes that you can almost put in your pocket?
I used to use a black cab. I used to be a fan of the industry until they actually decided to take out legal injunctions to block every single safety measure for people in London, whether walking and cycling. And as a result of that, I try my best to boycott them because they're a disaster and they're an enemy of London.
An enemy of London? Steve,
Yep.
I've got to give you the last word on this. Steve McNamara, you're the enemy of London. It's a curious way to define black cabs, which for many people are part of the fabric, the DNA of London.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say, Ian, is TfL are not appealing it. The judge has refused them permission to appeal.
Okay.
She says that they're so unlikely as to win an appeal that she's refusing them permission.
Well,
to
I stand
appeal.
corrected on that. So there will be no appeal. So this is now as it is.
No, Ian, what can happen now is they can now approach the appeal court and appeal her decision not to let them appeal.
Right.
And
This is...
basically, in her summing up, says, good luck with that.
Okay, Steve, thank you. And good luck with it too. Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Donnachadh McCarthy, co-founder of Stop Killing Cyclists, was the other voice you heard. And if you work in the... I think my views are quite known on black cabs and the importance that they have in big cities, and I would say that for transportation in any big city. But the capital and black cabs are like red buses and phone boxes in terms of their totemic significance, in terms of their safety and getting around the place and people who know what the hell they're doing. Then I would argue they're absolutely crucial. And the disabled access is amazing. The fact that 25% in a really short period of time have moved over to electric and doing all the things you want to do, and yet you find yourself, and I've been in cabs where we've had to change the journey because the cab driver's gone, oh blimey, yeah, it's that the new lane you're not allowed to go down, the new gate system that you can't go up there and you can't go around here. It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. And